Review the pathway for CSF production. We're going to keep it simple. We're going to say that it flows through the chicken, and then we'll discuss some of the clinical implications for ventricles and how they might affect the patient. So we have the chicken head, we have the chicken body, we have the lateral ventricles, right, which swoop around like a big fancy mohawk. There we go, mohawk hairdo. So we have the chicken with the eye, that's third ventricle. This is fourth ventricle. The two that swoop around are the lateral ventricles, right? Production of CSF, we're going to keep it simple. So CSF is made by the choroid plexus. Choroid plexus, you can find out throughout the ventricles. A lot of times we'll say third and fourth ventricle for the choroid plexus. All I'm going to ask you is for choroid plexus. So who makes CSF? And the answer is choroid plexus. Technically, what happens with CSF is that there's a blood-brain barrier. And on the other side of the blood-brain barrier is the blood, right? So this side is the blood, this is the brain. And the blood side, you have arteries. So we start off with arteries. I know I'm writing this like really tiny. My board is much smaller than I'm used to. So arteries pass through the blood-brain barrier. CSF is now produced by choroid plexus. And CSF can travel throughout all of this. But we're going to start off that it travels through the lateral ventricles into the third ventricle. So we're going to skip some of these. I will have you memorize the aqueduct. From the third ventricle, it goes through the aqueduct into the fourth ventricle, and then from the fourth ventricle, it exits. So you remember how we said the meninges had 3 layers, and we said, where do you find the CSF? You find it in the subarachnoid space. So we're going to take this, and we're going to put it into the subarachnoid space. So CSF flows from lateral ventricles through the third ventricle, through the cerebral aqueduct of Sylvius, into the fourth ventricle, out the two lateral of Luschka and 1 median of Magendie. And then it finally ends up in the subarachnoid space. Now, I started off in the arteries. I need to take it back to the veins. So how do I get back to the veins? Well, the subarachnoid space has what we call arachnoid granulations or arachnoid villi. And so that will travel and take it back into the sinuses of the subdural space. And you guys can review this as many times as you want. So these are the sinuses, and the sinuses are essentially veins, right? So then it travels through the veins, back to the body, into the heart, and then the heart can recirculate it after it goes through the lungs, goes back to the heart, and then it goes up to the brain through arteries, passes through the choroid plexus, which produces your CSF, which travels through the lateral ventricles into the third ventricle, through the cerebral aqueduct into the fourth ventricle, out the 2 lateral of Luschka, the 1 median of Magendie, back into the subarachnoid space, and through the through the, what we call this is arachnoid villi or arachnoid granulations. How I remember it is little villages for spiders. Ew, yuck. So I have little spider villages, and then it passes through the sinuses, back through the veins. So one more time, start all over again. Arteries, blood-brain barrier, choroid plexus makes CSF, which travels through the lateral ventricles into the third, through the cerebral aqueduct into the fourth, out the 2 lateral of Luschka, 1 median of Magendie, into the subarachnoid space, through the arachnoid villi or granulations, back into the subdural space in the sinuses, back to the veins, back to the body. Rewind that.